to give you a little background, way back in the good old days, educators who wanted to collect things that were otherwise restricted. So let's say you had a saltwater fish tank in your classroom and you wanted to put a baby red drum or a baby pompano or a baby whatever that has a legal size restriction on it in that tank. Legally, you had to have a scientific collecting permit. Okay, there's a lot of paperwork involved with getting scientific collecting permits. There are reporting requirements. You had to do quarterly reports about your collections, and you had to annually renew them, and it was really a big deal. A lot of classroom teachers in Florida like to have stuff in their classrooms that technically they'd have to have had one of these research permits for. So FEMSI, which is the Florida Marine Science Educators Association, got together with the state agency that regulated marine species at the time, which was DEP, and said, hey, we're not talking large quantities of stuff here. We're doing this for educational purposes. Is there some way we can make it easier for teachers to have specimens in the classroom? So what came out of that was an educator aquatic species collecting certification workshop, after which you got an educator's collecting certificate. That started in 1997, and I think I actually got one of the first ones that they offered in the state. DEP said, we'll go ahead and work with you on this, but we really want there to be a component. We don't want people just out there willy-nilly collecting stuff. So we want there to be some education for the teachers about alternatives to always collecting live stuff, about safe handling methods, safe from the standpoint of the specimens as well as from the standpoint of the teacher. So we want it to be kind of a two-way thing. So that certificate came into play in 1997. A couple of years later, the responsibility for marine and freshwater wildlife was turned over to FWC. And a couple of years later, they actually created a special activities license. They've really formalized this collecting permit. And it's in the state statute, so you can look it up. There's an educator's special activity license now that's issued by Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission. They integrated freshwater species in at about that same time. This is freshwater animal species. Freshwater plants are actually not covered under this certificate. They are still managed by DEP. And we'll touch base on that a little bit later. Emergent plants and freshwater plants are regulated differently. So you are all here because you want to get this certificate. As I mentioned, you have to complete the pre and post test and show improvement on the post test in order to qualify for it. You can only use this for educational purposes, and we will revisit this. It doesn't allow you to go out and collect the granddaddy of all redfish and take it home and barbecue it. And you have to have an affiliation with an educational institution. So most of you are here because you do education with the NER, you do education through your school, or you do education with homeschool groups and others. There is a separate activity license for commercial entities. So folks who are ecotour operators, actually there's a different special activity license that they go for. So if you've got any questions about that, talk to me afterwards and I'll put you in touch with the right people who'll cover that. So I've sort of hinted that you might want to get this if you want to have live specimens in your classroom. The benefits of this special activities license, number one, you don't have to have that research permit anymore. Number two, it's good for 3 years. So you don't have to renew it annually. You do have to keep track yourself of when your permit expires, because the state is not going to email you or call you and say, hey, your permit's expiring next month. You might want to look for another workshop. You don't have to file any reports with the state. So this permit will allow you to collect certain specimens that would otherwise be restricted by our Florida fishing regulations. And we're going to look at these in a few minutes, and we'll talk about that. But the fishing regulations have, for various species, both invertebrates and fishes, size limits, bag limits, seasonal limits. So some things you can only collect at certain times of the year. Some things they have to be a certain size. Sometimes it's between two sizes. Sometimes you can only collect a certain quantity. And this permit will waive a lot of those restrictions, and we'll get more into what exactly it waives a little further on in the presentation. The other thing that's really nice, and it hasn't always been this way, you do not have to have a saltwater or freshwater fishing license to use this collecting certificate. So if you have the certificate and you are doing stuff for educational purposes, you don't have to have a fishing license. Now again, if you're going out to catch something that you're going to consume, you need to have a fishing license, because that personal consumption isn't covered under this. And of course, you can't sell anything that you collect, because that would be a totally different license.